Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Shore, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be talking about a book that I picked up at a book sale. It's called Well Versed by Pastor James Garlow. And some of you may have heard of James Garlow. He is the senior pastor of Skyline Church in San Diego. He is pastoring a church that was once pastored by some very famous pastors. John Maxwell, for example, the motivational speaker. He's become more of a motivational speaker, John Maxwell, than he has a pastor. He pastored for a number of years Skyline Wesleyan Church, as it was called back then. Now it's called Skyline Church. They dropped the Wesleyan. James Garlow is now the pastor, at least at the time of this book, and he's written a book called Well Versed, and it's got all kinds of teachings on different topics that are important. These are the kind of topics that will certainly bring great discussions amongst friends and family. Some people say, don't ever talk about religion and politics. Well, this book actually brings that all together and talks about all of it, talking about, for example, the purpose of government, First Amendment and religious liberty, schools, universities, and Christian faith, political correctness, what is that, marriage, school choice, and parental authority. See, it's wading into all of these big topics. Abortion, sexual identity and gender identity, healthcare, capitalism and socialism, all these hot button issues, taxes, debt, welfare and welfarism, workfare, minimum wage, Social Security. That's the one we're going to talk about today. Now, on almost all of these topics, I really align with Pastor James Garlow, because he takes a fairly accurate biblical Christian understanding, more of a conservative political understanding, which I believe is more in line with God's Word. If you just stack whether conservatism lines up with the Bible more than liberalism, there's no competition. It's actually, conservatism definitely lines up more with the Bible teachings, if not directly, indirectly. But on the issue of Social Security, James Garlow, a usually pretty reliable voice, I guess you might say he swings and misses at different points. So I want to go through here and explain why he messes up, he makes mistakes on Social Security, and explain what is really a correct understanding of Social Security. Now, much of what he says about Social Security, like the other things, I agree with. For example, he says, but the cold, hard fact about Social Security is that it is broken and broke. And that is true in the sense that if you project into the future, which the administration, Social Security Administration, does on its website and in other official papers, if you project into the future, they're saying that by the year 2032, there will have to be some kind of reduction in the payouts that Social Security recipients receive, because the trust fund that stores the money will not be able to keep up with all of the payouts. And that's not a good thing. So the administrators have to do something between now and 2032, or else people on Social Security will have a pay cut, which is really, really bad, because they were promised that if you work for 5 decades, 40, 50 years paying into a system, at the end of that 40 or 50 years, you will be able to count on it being there to draw from. That was the original contract with America, that the government will legally take out of your paycheck every week or every other week, however you get paid, and they will put that money in a Social Security trust fund, and over time, it will accumulate interest on that. And then when you're in your 65, 70, 75, you'll be able to draw out of that for the rest of your life, and you'll have at least a little bit minimum amount of money to live on, and you won't be in poverty. That was the goal of the original Social Security system established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the U.S. government at the time, that it would save older people from poverty as a disciplined means of saving for the end of their life. Okay? And that's the way it's pretty much worked since then. But the problem is that we're getting too many people drawing out of the Social Security Trust Fund and too few people paying into the Social Security Trust Fund. So that's the problem. And Pastor Garlow acknowledges that problem. And he says, unless something major changes the way benefits are awarded or major new sources of revenue are found, or both, the entire system is in danger of collapse. That's true. That is true. The weight of the recipients now and in the future are going to crush the system because we're gradually dwindling the number of pay-ins with the take-outs. So it was a time where you had like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 people paying in for every person taking out. And that worked out because then you could accumulate a trust fund. But then now it's down to, I think, 2 workers paying in for everyone taking out. And soon it will be 1 person paying in for every person taking out, and even less than that. So when that happens, you just can't sustain it. It's like a big Ponzi scheme in that sense. So he's right there. But then he makes a mistake. So the next line he says is, biblically, entitlement programs and forced savings retirement insurance programs like Social Security are never the role of the civil government. So he's linking entitlement programs with the Social Security system. And that is a false misconception because the Social Security system is not an entitlement program. Now, he actually said, entitlement program and a forced savings retirement insurance program like Social Security. So he didn't actually call Social Security in this statement an entitlement program, but he's linking them and he's saying they're pretty much on the same wavelength, and that's not the role of government. He is correct in the sense that there's nothing in the Bible that says that the role of government is to force you to save for your older age. And there's nothing in the Bible that says that we should have all these entitlement programs, food stamps, all this stuff, Section 8 housing, all this stuff paid out from government. And he's correct. If you go to Romans 13, that explains the purpose of government. It is for the establishment of order in society and to punish the evildoers. When you get right down to the basic bedrock purpose of government, it is for the purpose of preventing chaos and mayhem and disorder and all that kind of stuff. So he's right there, technically right, but he's bordering on lumping Social Security in with, he's talking in the same breath, Social Security with entitlement programs. And that's the problem. That's his misconception. It says, and then he says, He says the net effect, more money is being distributed to people for a longer period of time than was originally anticipated, which is true. People are living longer today than they did when Social Security was first established. So that is a problem. And what they've had to do was they've raised the retirement age. So, for example, when I started out, the age of retirement, when I started paying into Social Security, the system told me if you work until you're 65, you can collect your full retirement benefits at age 65. And then in the 80s, they raised Social Security retirement age for people like me to 67. So they raised it 2 full years. So I started paying in to Social Security, and many millions of other adults started paying in when they were young and anticipating that they would get their full retirement age starting at 65. And then the government changed the terms and said, no, it's 67 now because people are living longer. Okay. Well, that's not a good thing because they're changing the terms of contract. But okay, all right, fine. Now, if what happens in 2032 happens, people like myself who's paid in will have it changed a second time. And not the retirement age, but the terms of the payouts. So you're going to get a reduction of 25% or something like that, according to the estimations. Now, hopefully it won't. I don't think they should change it again for people like me. They may have to change it for people that haven't had it changed already. But if I get hit twice, that will really not be fair. And then it says, he says, where does it say in the Bible that we are supposed to retire or at 65 or at any age for that matter? Well, he's absolutely right. And what a bad negative consequence of retirement is that people think that they are entitled to leisure and a life of just kicking back and doing nothing. They think that because they've worked 40, 50 years, now they can spend their whole rest of their life playing and doing whatever they want to do and not being productive and not really contributing to society or other people's lives or bettering the kingdom of God. Just kick back, relax, travel, goof off, sleep in, don't do any work, don't do anything you don't want to do. Just act like you're on endless vacation for the next 20, 30 years. That is not biblical. That is not Christian. That is a secular, man-made vision that people have taken a basic program like Social Security. And again, the original intent was to keep older people out of dire poverty. And it introduced a sort of a discipline on their part that they could save and save up, and the government would help them in the discipline of saving. And then at the end of their life, they would have some money, not a whole lot, but some money enough to live on and exist and live out the rest of their life. Okay, that was a good intention. It still is a good intention. But this whole idea of just kicking back and relaxing and doing whatever you want to do and goofing off and eating out all the time. And, I've worked 40, 50 years. Now it's me time, I've heard some people say. And just acting really selfish and not at all what the biblical vision for life is, even at the end of your life. So there's never anything in the Bible that says, well, there's a certain time of life that you reach where you can focus on you. No, that's selfish. So I do agree with Pastor James Garlow, in the sense that this whole Social Security system and retiring at age 65 or now 67 has misled people to distort a vision for the end of their life with this retirement myth. And for a lot of people along the Midwest and East Coast, that means like going to Florida, retiring and going to Florida. That is so much popular. That was popular for a long time. I don't know if it is today because it's so expensive in Florida, but for a whole generation or so of people, that was the vision, that you go to Florida and you retire and you kick back and you eat out all the time and goof off and travel maybe around the country and just endless vacation. No responsibilities, just do your own thing. And again, I agree with Pastor Garlow that that is not the biblical understanding of life. That is a selfish, secular understanding of life. So we agree on that. But he misunderstands the fact that even though it is not strictly outlined in the Bible that Social Security is something that is a responsibility of government, and perhaps it could have been created in a different manner. It could have been made volunteer. The government could say, we're offering a program where if you put in every week, we will take out Social Security, your Social Security money, and then we will put that in a trust fund for you at the end of your life and make it a voluntary thing. That possibly would have been a little more biblical, because the government then is just helping you make the decisions you want to make. I guess the government decided, well, if we make it voluntary, then people probably won't take it because they'll probably think, I need that money. And then at the end of the life, they will be destitute and in poverty, and then something like charity or even government will have to step in to basically feed them and clothe them and house them. And so we're back to the government providing. So maybe government feared that if enough people don't take it and don't volunteer to take it, then society would be worse off. And so they decided, okay, we're just going to make it mandatory that everybody pay into Social Security. Now, I remember when, as a young pastor, I was faced with the prospect, ministers have an option that they don't have to pay into Social Security for religious reasons, and they can plan for their own retirement. They can set aside whatever they want from paycheck to paycheck and have their own organized pension or whatever they want to do denominationally or with the church they're at. And in fact, I talked to a pastor, this is way back, saying that he did not pay into Social Security and that he was going to come up with his own retirement plan. So he opted out. And he said, you should opt out. You should opt out because, you can do a better job of managing your money than the government. And I did consider it, but the big hang up for me was the law says that you can only opt out for religious conscience reasons. So you have to be against it in principle. So like the Amish, for example, they're against all government intervention on principle. They think that that's not the place. The government should not be taking my money and doing things, making decisions for me. And they believed it on basis of conviction, conscience sake. And so this pastor was saying, hey, you can opt out of Social Security. You don't have to pay that tax, and they don't have to take your money. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, wait, I don't have any real strong conviction that it's not biblical what they're doing. it's certainly not in keeping with the very narrow scope of Romans 13, punish the wicked, um, maintain order in society. So it's not following the strict government definition that the Bible gives, but there are hundreds and maybe even thousands of areas where the government is not following the strict biblical uh, definition of government. So how picky do we want to get? Because if we're going to say, well, Social Security isn't strictly following a minimalist government philosophy, okay, and are we going to withhold any participation in any program that doesn't follow that strict? You're going to find there are a lot of areas where the government is not doing a strict idea of what the government's supposed to do. And, if you want to try to be an Amish, and if you want to try to be sort of a person that is dropping out of society, yeah, you might want to go that route. But I don't find the Bible teaching that the government is not allowed to help people save up for their retirement. I kind of think it's a good discipline. In fact, I was thinking about this the other day. If I were to opt out when I was younger and all these decades now, looking at Social Security in the future, I'm not sure I could have maintained the discipline to save properly. Because you do have to be a very disciplined person. You have to say, okay, look, if I'm not going to have Social Security as my discipline, if they're not going to take money out of my paycheck every week, then I'm going to have to do that myself. Do I have the discipline to do that? I don't think I did. And I don't think I do still. Because there are times when you're really scraping by and you don't have enough money to make ends meet. And are you sure you're going, okay, I got to take this percentage out, 10% or whatever it is, 12% out of my paycheck to pay for like 40 years down the road? No, you don't think that way. You survive from week to week, from month to month. So if you're low on food, you're going to spend all your money that you need to survive. And it's going to be very hard to keep that discipline going for like 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And that's why the government has the tax that comes right out of your paycheck. So they're not asking you to do it yourself. They're saying, we're going to take it. We're going to be the discipline. And so I really think that has been a help, and it's going to be a benefit for me, because I don't think I could have maintained the self-control to do it myself. Now, some people could have, especially the wealthy. But I think for your average person, no. I think it was a good thing. It was a good idea. Again, it could have been made voluntary. I think I would have volunteered for it. If they had asked me, do you want us to take the money out, or do you? I think I would have opted in voluntarily. But it wasn't voluntarily. It was compulsion, which is okay, fine. But James Garland, again, he equates Social Security with a welfare program or some kind of entitlement program, and that's where he's wrong. For example, he says Social Security will eventually come to an end, probably through its own collapse. While shocking the nation, it would have one benefit. It would place the responsibility where God intended, instead of depending on his government to redistribute the fruit of his neighbor's work. The individual has the dignity of self-reliance. Well, no, again, that's an entitlement program, and Social Security isn't that. He says, instead of depending on his government to redistribute the fruit of his neighbor's work, That's not what Social Security is. We're not redistributing the wealth of my neighbor's work for my own benefit when I retire. We're getting back the money, hopefully with interest, that we put in. And if you look at your Social Security record, and you can do that if you go online and you sign up for the Social Security account and all that online, you can look at all of the money you put in there. And if you look at it, you're like, oh my goodness, we're talking about tens of thousands, maybe $100,000 that you've put in, you and your corporation or the company you work for, your employer. You look at the amount, and it's a lot of money that they put in. So you're not on a welfare program when you're on Social Security. So he's equating, says, instead of depending on his government to redistribute the fruit of his neighbor's work, the individual has dignity of self-reliance. That's a false equating. He's equating Social Security and receiving a Social Security check every month with living off the fruit of your neighbor's wealth. No, you're living off the savings that you put in there over 4 or 5 decades of work. That came out of your paycheck. That's your money that's in there. So there's a lot of misconceptions and confusion, even from leaders like this. And so we have to be careful. We have to say, yeah, there needs to be definite reform of Social Security in the sense they need to administer it, and they need to come up with solutions so that people don't get a pay cut. Because after all, again, that's your money that you pay in there, and you were told that your money would be compounded with interest so that over the years and over the decades, over 40, 50 years, that little amount that you put in every month, every week from your paycheck will grow and grow and grow with interest to the point where then at the end of your life, you have something to live on. That's your money. That's not a welfare program. Welfare would be all of a sudden everybody just automatically gets that, whether they pay in or not. Yeah, that's welfare. If you're a foreigner, for example, and you come into the country last year and then you turn 67 and you start drawing Social Security and you draw it for the rest of your life, that's welfare because you haven't paid in. But for people that have paid in 30, 40, 50 years, every paycheck, when they start drawing, that's not welfare. That's not an entitlement program. You're not living off the fruit of your neighbor's wealth. You're living on the compound of your own retirement savings. So, yes, we need to pray that the government administers this justly and wisely so that it doesn't run out, so it doesn't rob people of the benefits they paid in to receive. But we need to make sure we understand it correctly. And Pastor Garlow, while he gets a lot right in his section on Social Security, I'm afraid he misconception of Social Security as an entitlement program is wrong. So we need to correct that. Hope that's been helpful. We'll see you back next week. God bless.